Now, this is a question which I have to ask you.
You don't have to.
I have to. Because it's one of those questions which, I read somewhere that you work in 90-minute increments. And that at the end of a 90-minute increment, hold your breath, you hang upside down.
You're making me sound very strange.
No, well, every writer has his quirks,
Yes.
right? But is that true?
Well, first of all, it's 99-minute increments.
Oh, okay.
Three blocks of 33.
33,
Course,
okay.
Of course.
Of course.
I'm not doing myself any favors here and trying not to sound strange. I have an hourglass on the desk, and writing is a very stationary, sedentary existence, and so I make a point of every hour and a half jumping up and doing some sit-ups or push-ups or walking around or whatever it is to get the blood moving, and I have been known to strap on gravity boots and hang upside down now and then. I think it's kind of funny. You see the world entirely differently upside down. And if you've read Angels and Demons, has anybody here read Angels and Demons?
Yes, of course.
Okay. You know what ambigrams are. You know that they're right side up and upside down. And it was great because I had this wonderful poster for Angels and Demons hanging in my office, and it was an ambigram, and it looked the same as soon as I went upside down, and it always just sort of grounded me. It looked the same right side up as it did upside down. So I highly recommend hanging upside down to clear your head.
I'm not going to try that, Dan.
Okay.
I'm certainly not going to try that one. But nevertheless, let me ask you now, everyone, I think, out here, every aspiring writer has dealt with writer's block. And
I feel the same way about writer's block, whatever that was. It's a bad word. Another conspiracy.
Another conspiracy. So the question is that, have you ever had to deal with it? I mean, the question actually is much more about the process that you follow in terms of writing.
I don't think we're supposed to talk about what writers. No, I don't think. I think it's the topic.
Do we need to hang upside down? Okay, we are fine.
Just neither one of us move.
Absolutely. So the question is that, what is the process that works for each of your novels? So take us through that process. That how many months or years does it take? What sort of research happens?
Sure.
Because everyone out here would be very curious about that.
Well, every book is different, but it starts with research, with essentially traveling and reading, and picking a topic that fascinates you. In the case of my last book, Inferno, I was fascinated by Dante's Divine Comedy, how it related to our vision of hell. I was fascinated by the science of overpopulation, and that is sort of a world issue. I always try to find a gray area, whether it's between science and religion, as you may have seen in Angels and Demons. I wrote a book called Digital Fortress that talked about civilian privacy and national security. There's always a gray area in the middle, and that's where I like to write. And once I choose a topic, I start early. I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, every day, 7 days a week.
Okay.
And I will write from maybe 4 until 10 or 11.
Okay.
I'll break for lunch, and then I'll try to go do something physical to get away from the computer.
Right.
Go play tennis or play golf or run or just do something active. In the afternoon, maybe I'll deal with some of the business of publishing, which could be talking to publishers or agents or whoever it is or fans. And then at night, my wife and I will have friends in for dinner. We'll go out, and that's pretty much what a normal day looks like. As far as the actual process of creating a novel, for those of you who are writers, I strongly recommend you take the outlining process very, very seriously, that you know how your book ends before you start it.
Absolutely.
That's certainly something that I do. I don't know really any writers who don't do that. And the other thing is that you take editing very, very seriously. Writing really isn't about writing, it's about rewriting. For every one page that you have in a book like The Da Vinci Code or Inferno, I wrote 10 pages that I threw out. And I don't get it right the first time. Not many people do. I certainly don't. There's this great interview with Hemingway where he's asked about Old Man and the Sea, and they say, what took so... That was a wave. What took you so long? And Hemingway responded, getting the words right. It's that simple.
At some point of time, once you've done your research, is there a trade-off between research and story? We are shutting this one off? Yeah. Okay. So is there somewhere a trade-off between research and story?
Sure. Well, I mean, research is critical, but there also becomes a point where it becomes procrastination.
Yeah.
And you have to figure out what that point is. Sooner or later, you've got to sit down and write the story.
Yep.
And what I try very hard to do is give readers just enough story and just enough research at every moment, such that you feel like the plot arcs are sort of, they're always moving forward, but at the same time, on every page, you've maybe learned something or had to think about something in a slightly new way. And that really is the main thrust of the editing process, because once I have an outline, I really know how the story is going. But the editing process is getting that pacing right and getting the sort of the thickness of the language right and just make sure that it moves at an even pace.
So at some point of time, when you've, let's say, just finished a manuscript, do you sit down and actually, again, go through your manuscript in terms of reading it, or do you leave it to the editor?
Well, by the time I finish a manuscript, I could probably quote it verbatim without looking at it. It's an awful feeling to know something that well. That's right. So at that point, I'm really not a very good critic. I don't have any perspective, which is why writers have editors.
Yeah.
And so it would go to my editors, and they would read it and say, hey, the sorts of comments I get back are, this section's terrific, but we could use maybe a little bit more about this piece of art. That was interesting to me, I'd like to know more. Or they might say, this chapter feels a little bit long, maybe trim it up. Or I don't really believe this character would say this or do this. We need to sort of frame that better. And that's something that really, as a writer close to a manuscript, you just don't see. And it takes somebody else reading it with fresh eyes. So when you sit down to read a book, in most cases, there are many people who've read it before you, even if you read the very first copy, trying very hard to make it just right for you, such that your experience is just right.
Yeah. We've invited a lot of questions today on social media, and of course, we've collected questions at the gate to the NCPA. So we've selected a few of them. So one of the questions that has also come up, let me see the name. It's from Anahita Shroff. That is what you write fact or fiction?
Well, that's part of the game now, isn't it?
Absolutely.
It's obviously a blend of fact and fiction. I like to write books set in the real world. I want you to know that when Robert Langdon is looking at Madonna of the Rocks on the wall, that's a real painting. And I describe it in the real way. Of course, Robert Langdon doesn't exist. The conversations don't exist. But these are fictional characters moving through a real landscape. And part of the fun and part of what I do very intentionally is to attempt to make readers question what is real, what isn't real, and ideally, run to a research book or to the internet and say, oh my God, that's a real organization, or that's a real place.
Yeah.
That's fun.
So would you say that the fun is not knowing whether you are reading fact or fiction?
Well, I think in most cases you'll know. I try to write in such a way that you know what is fact and what is fiction. But sometimes, if I found a terrific topic, which I always try to do, so much of the fact, you say, well, this can't be true. And then you look it up, and you have the exact same experience that I had when I first saw it, saying, this can't be true, but it is.
Absolutely.
And when that happens, I immediately say, well, this has to go in the book, and I have to figure out how to make it relevant to the plot such that it doesn't sort of stick out like a sore thumb.
When you're in the process of researching, has it become more difficult for you to do your research, given the fact that you're now so well recognized? It's not easy for you to simply just fly down to some place and walk around.
That's true. It's been a little bit of a double-edged sword. There's been a wonderful thing that's happened, and that is that I've had access to people in places that I, realistically would not have had access to if I had not written the Da Vinci Code. So,
Okay.
so that's the wonderful part of it. I get to see things and talk to people that know a lot.
Right.
The tough part, you're right, is I try to keep my topic secret. And so if I, for Inferno, go to Florence and go into the baptistry and stare at a three-headed demon on the ceiling, taking notes for an hour, the guide who's with me then calls his wife and says, "I know what Dan Brown's book's about." So there are two things I do. One is I either wear a baseball cap and glasses and just go as a tourist, and that usually works. Or when I'm getting a tour and somebody knows who I am and knows that I'm working on a book, I have this very tricky technique that I use, which is I was writing this last book about Dante. So for every one question I asked about Dante, I asked 5 about Machiavelli that I didn't care about. So everybody thought I was writing about Machiavelli. So.
Interesting. I think we have one very, very, it's a question out there, so I must ask it. It's from a gentleman called Srinath Sarvanan. And he asks that, considering that Robert Langdon is your fictional alter ego, do you wear a Mickey Mouse watch?
I have the Mickey Mouse watch that Tom Hanks wore in the movie, and I have it at home. I wear it sometimes. I did not want to bring it on tour for fear of losing it, but it has been worn, and that's a funny question, actually.
Okay, a question out there, which is that, at the end of the day, there's the old proverb which says that philosophy is about questions that can't be answered. And then there's religion, which is about answers that should not be questioned.
Sure.
So at some point of time, do you see yourself more as a philosopher, or as more of a scientist, or more of a spiritualist? Where exactly do you fall in?
That's a generous question. I'm pretty confused, to be honest with you. The world is a big, diverse place with a whole lot of ideas. And I sort of consider myself a work in progress. And the reason I write is to learn. And the reason I wrote the Da Vinci Code was to work out some of my own thoughts about the life of Jesus. And the story I told, to me personally, makes more sense. So each book is really more of a personal journey, and I'm just sharing it. I'm not really trying to convince anyone. I'm just